It was absolutely amazing.
Ties was pretty great.
It was interesting.
The work that we got to do was wonderful and incredible.
We were able to really get in there and do what the family needed.
Us coming into their home, into their space, and it was great work.
I mean, it was stressful. It was rewarding too.
The intensity of it was what really helped the program to be successful.
Even in my current role, I'm always pulling back from things that I learned while working at the TIES program.
This was definitely a fascinating experience for me. Seeing how invested the staff were in these families and the kind of engagement that they were able to achieve and success they were able to achieve was rewarding.
Post-intervention, 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, those gains were still there.
It may be expensive on the front end, but the savings are tremendous.
I would get my case via email from our Commander-in-Chief, Richard, and I would contact DCS, find out a little information that maybe not have been on the referral paperwork. Then I would contact the family. Seems easy, but sometimes we would try to contact the family and it wouldn't, and the numbers we had wouldn't get to them or whatever the case may be. So we would do stop-bys, and I would, the first time that I saw a family sometimes was me knocking on their door and introducing myself and letting them know that DCS sent me.
That initial knock on the door, they did look at us, look at me, look at the therapist, as if we were an extension of the Department of Children's Services.
I'm a visitor in your home. I'm not here to investigate. I'm not here to judge anything that you're doing. I'm just here to figure out what are the needs that you have and how can I, as someone in the third party coming from a grant program, help you.
Within that first 2 weeks of going in with families, we looked at what are the basic level needs. It's hard to think about recovery when I'm worried about my lights are going to get turned off next week. It's hard to think about recovery when I don't have any groceries, I don't have formula, I don't have diapers.
I want to know what your basic needs are, what the most important things are now. Depending on what the family's needs were would depend on what route we took the rest of the intervention.
A lot of the families that I worked with had a history of trauma. The parents that we're working with in these families were once kids that didn't learn it from their own parents, and it's a generational thing. Maybe they had been in different kinds of psychiatric facilities or drug and rehabilitative facilities, and for whatever reason, it wasn't working at this current moment while DCS was shining a light on their family.
There was always the underlying child safety stuff that we had to be very mindful of, very aware of. You had parents who were either still using substances and attempting to end that, or had just had 5 seconds of clean recovery time. So child safety was always a huge piece of that. As the therapist coming into the home, you always have to be planning for discharge. And you always have to be looking for any kind of external supports that you can give a family that's going to be helpful. 6 to 8 weeks sounds like a long time, but when there's so many needs, it goes very, very quickly. Every family had very different needs, so we had to very quickly connect with the communities that we were in to make contacts to know if we don't know a resource, who can we call that might?
So we were able to address those basic level needs first, which helped build trust with the therapist, with the family.
And then moving over to the higher order thinking goals, like how do I raise a child? How do I maintain a household? How do I maintain stress? A lot of these families, never were given the opportunity to learn coping skills when things got tough, and we're coming in at a time of crisis, so things are at their toughest.
The rapport that you build with people that you work with is one of the biggest determinants of success in treatment.
Once we got into the house, building rapport is definitely the #1 thing that we have to do.
It honestly started with the very first phone call, right off the bat recognizing that this is their space I'm coming into. I'm not an authority figure coming in your home. I genuinely want to help the situation. And then once you get in the home, of course, following up on that.
But I found that the best way to build rapport with families was just to be honest, just to be upfront, transparent from the get. Definitely tell them that my role is very different from a DCS caseworker.
Our goal is to keep your kids safe and keep you unified as a family.
You do spend that much time with them. You have the ability to build the rapport that is going to make them successful.
They really saw the therapist was there to support them, was there to assist them with getting over whatever substance use had brought them to the attention of the department.
And building rapport, I really enjoyed working with the kiddos, because kiddos are way more trusting. It's very simple to show a parent how much you care for their family by showing them how much you care about their child.
I really just went in and I was myself. I dropped my title at the door. They like to know that you're a real person and that you're not just some other authority figure who's going to come in their home and threaten to take their kids away. I went into the home in jeans and a t-shirt, and I sat down, and if I had to talk some about what similarities we have as between me and the family, we did that. We would take them to the grocery store. I did some grocery shopping with some families and doctors' offices. We really became a big support for the family.
I did have a few issues where, coming right outside of school, I was trying to use like bigger words and scientific research materials, and I was humbled very quickly because I would just get these faces like, you're not speaking at all to what it is that we need. And I would take a step back, kind of talk to myself like, okay, Steph, let's think about another way to say this. Simplifying things is actually pretty hard for me when I've learned in an academic setting to be, a little bit more complex. But that was the best lesson that I probably took within my first few days of working at Ties, was that you can get a lot of things done without having to, show your smarts. You can just show the actions.
You don't see a lot of programs that are done at this intensity level. So the therapists were in the home 8 to 10 hours a week. That's a lot of time spent with one client and one family. And the in-home perspective, I don't know of very many programs that are done in the actual setting where families and clients live.
In a clinic setting or in an insurance-based program, you've got limits on things. So you really, in some cases, you really can't address everything that needs to happen. These families had a lot of barriers.
It wasn't as time limited as sessions are now that I'm in private practice. I find myself missing the days when I could spend 2 or 3 hours just really diving in and doing the work. This population has a lot of reason to distrust workers coming in their homes. And having that 2 to 3 hour window multiple times a week allowed you to get past the barrier time and time and time again to actually do good, deeper work with our clients.
We would work with families from anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Everything was goal-oriented, whether it would be giving educational materials, modeling how to do things within the system, whatever system that is, the family system or the DCS system, or just the system of, going and getting children's immunizations. So it really differed from person to person.
We did a lot of looking for jobs online and driving around and applying for jobs. They just didn't know where to go. They didn't have anybody to help them with the transportation, or they were so stressed about all being so overwhelmed that they couldn't think clearly, and they couldn't see the resources that may have already been there.
Our caseloads were really small. There were 2 to 3 caseloads at a time because it was such intensive work. But typically I spent about 4 or 5 hours in the car traveling either myself or with the family in tow, going to whatever they needed to get done.
Sometimes with it being in smaller communities, you have to get creative with how you address some things.
There was no prescriptive goal setting. There was no prescriptive, this is what you must do. It was really based around what the families identified as needs. And I think that helped build a lot of rapport between the in-home therapists and the families, and a lot of trust. And I think when you have that kind of relationship between the provider and the client, you just see a lot more success.
We became 6th member of the family sometimes and had to, maintain professional boundaries at the same time. We're there for meals sometimes and, helping them prep their meals. We're there to play games with them and just to also re-engage what it means to be a family. and what it means to have that security.
We're treating the whole family. So a lot of programs we'll see in the behavioral health care space, we're really treating one component. So we do depression or we do trauma, whereas TIES really was holistic in looking at the entire spectrum of family needs. So starting from a very basic sort of case management perspective, looking at the home environment, looking at the community environment, to also addressing specific treatment things and like relapse prevention with the families. And I think when you take that kind of whole person view and you really take the time to be responsive to those kinds of issues, you just see, you know, a greater achievement because a lot of those barriers have been removed for families.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that you need, at the very core, those basic needs of food, shelter, and then above that, you need belonging. You need to have a sense of security. You need to be able to know that you're going to go to school and that you're going to come home and mom and dad will be there, and mom and dad won't just physically be there, but they'll be there emotionally and spiritually and in every way that you need as a child to grow up in a healthy, happy life.
The therapists really believed in the Maslow's hierarchy, and you could see that they walked the walk in that regard. And again, just thinking about the family as a whole unit, thinking about the community as being part of that, thinking about the home environment as being part of that, and bringing all of that into the treatment process. The idea really is to work yourself out of a job here. We don't want people to have to be dependent on the types of services we're providing. It really is, you know, creating these teachable moments to build skills, to build a foundation where people can sort of take it from there.
It was remarkable to see families have that aha moment. Wherever that aha moment was, it could have been, you know, teaching their kid how to tie their shoes, to being able to stand in court and advocate for yourself because you're about to lose your house.
I had the privilege of being able to sit in every week on staffings. We had a really good, I think, relationship between the evaluation team and the treatment team because we were actually going into the home to do data collection as well. I think some of the successes that we heard about and that my staff also reported were just this sort of empowerment I think that families felt. One of the things that was hard to measure, but that I think anecdotally definitely happened was this idea about self-advocacy. So empowering families to actually interact with the systems that they were in, whether that be schools, DCS, because that was obviously a large referent for this program, being able to sort of stand up for themselves, you know, have the confidence basically to engage in that way, I think was a success that, you know, wasn't captured in the numbers, but definitely anecdotally was there.
A lot of the parents that we worked with didn't have birth certificates for their kids or didn't have birth certificates for themselves. And this might be because of constantly moving or being displaced or just not having that, you know, understanding that this is something that you should probably have. Mini success would be, you know, getting that birth certificate in their hands and having that to jump off and go on to the next step of whatever they had to get done.
With a program like TIES that is so intensive, even if small gains are earned, it's great, right? We can leave a family even with small gains, and it's wonderful.
People actually kind of grew by leaps and bounds knowing that somebody was actually there who really did care about their outcomes and really did care about helping them.
The biggest successes were those mothers who were addicted to opiates and who had NAS babies. Seeing them not only get clean, but stay clean, and even post-intervention when we would go out and do interviews with them, they still had their workbooks, they still had their notebooks, they were still using the skills that had been imparted to them by the therapist.
Circumstances of living with a parent that has a drug addiction, those kids, they get put in some really tough spots. And there were plenty of times that I would wake up in the middle of the night and, or if I could sleep, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just see the kids' faces and just wonder if they ate that day and wonder if, you know, if their parent was putting forward the best effort to keep their family together. I can see the kids' faces right now, and I can see them on day one, I can see them on the last day, and unfortunately I can see them on the days that they were taken from their families, and that was the toughest to deal with.
Even in the cases where, as a professional, I had to make the recommendation for removal, I'm still really proud of the work that we did and the changes that were taking place day in and day out with this program.
There was a really comprehensive evaluation for this program. We had a lot of data that we were collecting. We wanted to know both what kinds of services families were receiving and the dosage and the kind of intensity, but we also wanted to know about outcomes on a varying level of scales, including how parents were doing in terms of their parenting stress, as well as their capacity and confidence, to engage in family functioning, as well as outcomes for the kids. And then overall, the main goal was understanding permanency and substantiated maltreatment after services were over. One of the biggest takeaways that we have from this program is that this program really impacts parenting. If nothing else, parenting skills improved dramatically from the time that parents and families started the program to when they ended. And that was actually one of the key variables that we were seeing stay improved over time. So even a year after families had exited services, parenting skills continue to be very high, continue to improve. So that kind of retention was really impressive. A year out, we still had 91% of kids who had no additional substantiated maltreatment, so they had no other DCS allegations in that regard. And we also had 88% of kids who remained safely in their homes, so they had not been removed into state custody. So that's always really, really nice to hear, and I think is a real big indicator of the success of the program.
The women that we served with the TIES program, when I talked to them, the parenting was really helpful to them. They talked a lot about how they were better able to communicate with their families and their children. They felt empowered to do things on their own. Those are the things that they really felt the program helped them with. To be able to hear that directly from the people you're serving is really important.
Understanding context is critical. You can get the numbers, kind of on the back end of a program, but if you don't understand sort of the situations that people are coming from or the situations people are living in, you don't really have the full picture. You really do need to complement that with some qualitative understanding of people's living situations.
Also, this qualitative data, which is client voice, right? It's participant voice and tells you what the program means to people, how they feel about the people that are coming into their homes, the change the program is making. Sometimes that gets lost in the numbers, and collecting that data is also important. So numbers and the story together tell a greater story and can really be meaningful for the program.
And I think the other piece of that too is that people are the experts in their own lives. When we think about how we collect data and the fact that we sort of impose a bit of a top-down approach to that when we're designing evaluations, that can be very one-sided and it can be very limiting. And so always sort of remembering to bring in the client perspective, to bring in the provider perspective, to really round out kind of the truth we're trying to get at when we do evaluation.
The mothers also talked a lot about some structural things that is beyond the scope of the TIES program, and these communities also need, larger support and economic development and things like that. And all of these mothers seem to be very hyper aware that we need jobs, we need some sort of, there were jobs here, now they're not, and it was very interesting to sort of see that difference.
The kinds of changes that need to happen aren't something that you can do 1 hour every 2 weeks and expect fast enough progress to help these kids. This program and programs like it, they may be incredibly expensive, but the research is clear it is still significantly cheaper than kids coming into custody, and that's if you only count the financial cost. When you think about the trauma of being taken from your family, even if you're lucky enough to be put into a foster situation that is healthy, and we know that's not the case for everybody, but even if you are lucky enough to get that, you are still talking about intensive trauma, being taken from your family, and then if reunification happens, that's a whole other trauma in and of itself.
It is an expensive model, there's no doubt about it. Having one therapist work with 2 families at a time, that's an expensive model. It is a lot cheaper than inpatient, but I also think we're looking at the PIE, person and environment. The therapist is able to go, is able to see their environment and see, is this a healthy environment? What can I do to make the environment more healthy? And then how can I guide this family that I'm working with through to get them to the other side of sobriety? The long-term gains are you're looking at reduced involvement with police, with hospitalizations, with the Department of Children's Services, with the criminal justice system. So it's pulling them back from a lot of those services that are hard to quantify.
It is expensive, and I think part of the expense is because we aren't just treating one piece of the person. We are really treating an environment and a context. And I think that actually is kind of the justification for the expense, because what we gain from that is that we really are, again, setting a foundation for people to be successful so they don't have to engage in the system again, or maybe with the same intensity. So the cost savings associated with preventing, again, out-of-home placement, from preventing substantiated maltreatment, from preventing families from going back into sort of the substance abuse space, I think is valuable.
You're not only impacting the mother, you're impacting her children, the family. It's a whole unit, and all the people that impacts.
Without funding for programs like this, there are so many kids that will go through the cracks. I went to a training 2 years ago. One of the things that stood out to me was talking about how many millions of kids in America are being negatively impacted by parental substance use who will never meet the threshold of abuse or neglect. So even if we take aside all the abuse and neglect and you're just thinking about these kids, that's 3 kids in every classroom. And that's where programs like TIES, not only can we help the ones where abuse and neglect are happening, but we can also find those gaps for these 3 kids in every classroom that aren't getting services from anyone.
A little more indirectly, I think a value in that is it requires that all of these systems work together, and that takes some investment. But having all of these different providers, having all of these different agencies really interact with one another and learn to build those inroads and communication strategies really is not only a foundation for this program, but is a foundation for lots of other services that we have to provide. Thinking about how we make that collaboration more stable, really deepen those relationships is valuable.
It is important because it works. The research is clear. The research we did with TIES, the research you can go right now and look at on the National Family Preservation Network, IFPS, you can go and look, and the research is clear. Programs like this work. It is a difficult population. When you are dealing with substance abusing parents, it's a difficult population. You've got the substance abuse that you're sort of trying to deal with. You have parenting and neglect issues that you're dealing with. Simultaneously, you've got to deal with all of the attachment issues that every single member of the family has. That's not something I can recreate in an office setting, no matter how fantastic I may be today or how fantastic I may be 30 years from now. You cannot recreate that in an office setting anywhere. You cannot recreate that in a community behavioral health center anywhere. Having it in the home, having it intensive so you can get past all the barriers and join with the family is a way to make change happen.